The FNCS Week 1 qualifiers came down to a final 2v2 in the final game to decide who wins the first qualifier, but before we get there, let's go back to the start of Game 6, our final game, to see the dramatics that led up to this epic showdown. At the start of Game 6, there are 7 teams who could potentially compete for the #1 spot of this first qualifier. Robab and X-Force at Feudal Fuel, Cammy and Steady at Frenzy Fields, Tropex and Huddy at Hitches and Ditches, Blaha and Mixon at Meadow Mansion, iDrop and Mappy at Creaky Compound, Moneymaker and Finagin at the Hall of Whispers, and finally Vox and DKS at North Brutal Bastion. Although there were 7 possible teams, it is really just a race between our top 3 where 4 through 7 can only have a chance if all 3 of the top 3 teams die early. The game starts off and all of the teams land their respective drop spots, looting them up quickly before setting themselves up for Storm Surge. Cammy and Steady rotate into the jungle and use the slurp plants to trade a ton of Surge. They then box up a cache near them and don't waste any time waiting for it by continuing to look around them for Surge during the 45 seconds that it takes for the cache to open. Because of their early Surge, they were able to rotate to the northern dead side of the zone where they could save a ton of materials in future rotations. Moving over to our first place team, Robab and X-Force rotate up to the East Citadel Castle and try to get the vault, but when X-Force goes for the vault, this happens. Robab quickly disengages trying to salvage this game, and he begins to go find some quick tags onto the teams around him. While Robab is now a solo, let's check in on how our third place team is doing at this time. Tropex and Huddy push into the jungle and play a very similar Surge strategy to Cammy and Steady, using the slurp plants to trade the large amounts of Surge. Unfortunately, Tropex gets jumped on by Thomas and Malabuka. Fortunately, Huddy is able to spray Malabuka from a different angle and pick up the elimination. This leaves Tropex and Huddy in a 2v1 against Thomas, but Thomas is Thomas, so he quickly eliminates Tropex. Huddy gets spared though by a third-partying team, which allows him to get away from Thomas and to collect Tropex's reboot card. He goes deep into the zone and reboots Huddy in Frenzy. Then he re-rotates back into the jungle and gets a ton of loot from the jungle vault before hitting a rift into the zone. Of our top 3 teams, they are all alive at this point, but Robab is a solo and wasn't able to get X-Force's card. For 4th through 7th, they are all still alive at this point, and I just want to point out this sick rotate from Blaha and Mixon, who used the purple rocks to save themselves a ton of time on their mid-game rotations. Going back to our top 3, Steady and Cammy begin to make their 6th zone rotation when thankfully, Steady was able to get them up, and they were able to quickly soon after get into the 6th zone and the 7th zone as well. But right as the 8th zone reveals itself, the final disaster strikes.
150.
Gotta finish. I got finish. Chill,
In your box. That.
With this death, the 2nd place team was out of the game. But what about the rest of the top 3? Well, Robab continued to solo clutch and found a little bit of Surge, but it wouldn't be enough as he would quickly go down to the Surge on the 7th zone. This leaves only Tropex and Huddy alive as they make an easy 6th zone rotation and they pull the 7th zone. This means that 1st and 2nd are out of the game, and 4th through 7th now have an opportunity to take the win if they can get to 256 points. Finagin and Moneymaker in 6th die early in the endgame when they run out of materials and are forced to jump into box and die. And disaster strikes for Tropex and Huddy, who both get picked up in the 9th zone, breaking the tournament wide open for 3 teams: iDrop and Mappy, Blaha and Mixon, and DKS and Vox. Blaha and Mixon are in the worst position and they need a refresh on the 9th zone, and they spot their target. They then rotate along the right side of the moving zone, and they get themselves safely into the zone. Vox and DKS have a much simpler rotation as they just full tarp into the 9th zone, as they don't need to refresh anytime soon. In contrast, Mappy tarps immediately to the front side of the 9th zone and look for their win condition as they start cranking up for height, and they get it uncontested. As the 10th zone reveals, all 3 of these teams push closer and closer to Robab and X-Force for the 1st place spot. On the 10th zone, Mappy and iDrop continue to hold the high ground as Blaha and Mixon and DKS and Vox both start tarping on the low ground. Blaha and Mixon pick up a kill, and DKS and Vox get off the low ground and start to play slurp juices in the zone as the 10th zone finishes closing. The 11th zone reveals itself, and Blaha and Mixon notice that the zone is playing up elevation, and they begin to get off the low ground. Meanwhile, Vox and DKS find 2 eliminations onto players who weren't blocking their backs in the zone. They notice that the 11th zone is playing back towards them, so they just wait for the zone to reach them before tarping on the low ground. While on the low ground, they use the beast to cause chaos above them, and this allows them to kill a player who is running on their top. While this chaos is happening on the low ground, iDrop and Mappy are chilling on the high ground without a worry. But then, the 12th zone reveals, and it goes up elevation, which is bad for Vox and DKS on the low ground, but Blaha and Mixon are fine as they find a rift from the loot island and they use it. They then make the incredibly smart play of landing in the zone on a hill at front side in order to steal the high ground from iDrop and Mappy. iDrop and Mappy are forced to drop down onto the low ground, and they quickly create a pinch onto DKS and Vox, eliminating them in the process. This leaves just Mappy and iDrop and Blaha and Mixon in contention for 1st place. Blaha and Mixon quickly kill the remaining solo who tried sneaking them on height, but it's now a 2v2 and they have both gotten to 256 points, so the winner of this 2v2 will win the whole tournament.
Pull up to Mappy now to try and make the heal off happen again. We saw this a couple games ago, and a chance now with the Medmiss. Do Blaha and Mixon have the heal off potential though? It doesn't really seem like it. He's going to start to run low, and so Mappy will secure it.
Mappy had a better heal-off situation going into the endgame, which allowed iDrop and Mappy to win the first week of FNCS qualifiers. But if you enjoy how Mappy and iDrop won this week of FNCS qualifiers, you will also love the video where Queasy and Vino compete against Thomas and Malabuka for the Cash Cup win.